Welcome everyone, and good afternoon. Welcome everyone to the part two of the three-part Fireside Chat series between ClearPeaks and Dataiku. Today we are here to discuss or chat regarding some of the standard practices around managing an AI project successfully. Very quickly, a quick introduction about myself. My name is Dhiman, and I'm currently heading the global advanced analytics practice for ClearPeaks, where we specialize in end-to-end data analytics implementations. I have close to 12 years of experience working in various aspects of data science, AI, machine learning with multiple Fortune 500 companies. Having said that, we are very glad to have Guillaume from Dataiku today. But before that, let me quickly run you all through the housekeeping rules. Uh, Everybody's mic is going to be muted to just to ensure smooth experience. If there are any questions, please use the Q&A section. And people joining through the LinkedIn Live, use the chat option there. And of course, please share the session with your network. Once again, thank you for joining and welcome, Guillaume. Please, if you'd like to take the floor.
Hi, Dhiman. Thanks a lot, and thanks for having me. So I'm Guillaume. I work at Dataiku as the lead of the program management team in EMEA, and we typically work with customers that decide to leverage Dataiku as a corner piece of their transformation program, company-wide, and we're trying to help them drive those projects and bring to them the total experience of all other Dataiku customers and the different experience that they've been trying to run. Thanks for having me again.
No, thank you for joining us, Guillaume. So most importantly, to get things started, my first question, and since we are talking about AI projects, let's take it from the start. Like if we are talking about a project initiation, how does it go in your experience? How do orgs generally decide on the next or maybe the first AI project that they want to take up?
Good question, and I guess one that's top of mind for a lot of people. So we're all looking for a use case that will make history or be considered milestone by the rest of the organization. And it kind of boils down to the philosophical question of, do great men and women make history, or is it history that creates the context for those great figures to rise? And I believe it's more the latter in our context. That means that it will be very difficult for any of us to push a specific topic from scratch, ex nihilo within our organizations. We'll face lack of sponsorship, lots of difficulties to actually run the project. And even if we do achieve great technical results, we are often going to face a lot of reluctancy from the business to leverage the outputs of the project. So little impact in the end. What we all need to do is to find a topic that's in line with the business pain points and priority, find something that's already top of mind for them, and articulate how data and AI can bring part of a solution to that business pain points. And it has to be something that's also reasonable given their maturity, the data maturity of that specific department. I think we should be in the mindset of creating a network of champions within our organizations and taking them step by step through their next maturity phase, right? That means that sadly, maybe quite a few of our next AI projects are going to be dashboards or just data processing one. But that paves the way for future and hopefully more interesting and technical and predictive projects to come in the future. I think we should really think of that as a Maslow pyramid. You're not interested in predictive customer lifetime values, for example, when you don't have a reliable sales dashboard, the same way that it's very hard to care for the speed of your internet connection when your roof is leaking. So hopefully, though, we can achieve a nice mix of useful, maybe less shiny projects, but also shiny and technical ones that our leadership is often keen to have. Once we have achieved this and we think we have the right use case, Dhiman, how do you make the first step successful? How do you look at that?
Yeah, thanks for asking that. And to be honest, quite inspiring. And I quite relate with the Maslow, analogy that you've brought in. To be very honest, but at that kind of high level step, what I generally recommend any organization is not to try and attain complete clarity of any project that is related to AI or data analytics, because these things are always changing. right? Your data representations are changing. So anything that you're taking a call at this point of time might not be the same end of the project. So instead of that, having a high level or some level of understanding of the value capture process is more, or let's say is a better option to focus on. And that need, like you mentioned, that from the Maslow analogy, that if you have that need clear, okay, from the business side, what is remaining is to have that alignment with the IT, and is to figure out if it's possible to align or map the project results directly to the need. Like, let's say, for example, uh, a very cool implementation of computer vision. It can tell you, someone walking into a store, picking up certain items, putting it in the cart, and then walking out without any transaction, and so on and so forth. But the computer vision technology can identify and generate that, recognized activity insight. But taking that insight and integrating that with your POS in a unique and, let's say, secure way, there's a lot of engineering involved in that, multiple teams, multiple layers in your organization that would be involved in that particular conversation. So very, very important that you include all those people. And then for any AI project to succeed, few things that need to get discussed and hashed out, I would suggest at that stage, would be ensuring consumption. It is very fundamental, but oftentimes it's most undervalued. Bringing the key, business stakeholders and understanding how that's going to be consumed in their process or in their day-to-day, decision making process is very essential. And plus, other nooks and corners that I would suggest is very, let's say, granular. Any solid project implementation would require very, very in-depth functional experience, which requires, let's say, very in-depth domain expertise from the business side, and or require solid EDA work as well. So these are all very time consuming or very niche skilled oriented work, which you need to plan and incorporate into your project plan if you want to go forward. And lastly, that I would like to mention is, business stakeholders, or let's say the business users, need to recognize the fact or get accustomed to the fact that, AI maturity comes with continuous improvement. It's not a plug and play. It's not an overnight, magical thing that's going to happen. It's going to take time. It's going to happen through different releases, and most importantly, for both data as well as model simultaneously. You need to improve your model, at the same time you need to improve your data quality, and so on and so forth. And this actually brings me, like the decision making approach that just mentioned, that actually brings a question in my mind. And involvement of business in the data science lifecycle is nothing less than critical, right? Understanding how the org should assess and bifurcate, let's say, the ownership between the IT and business, when it comes to a data science project, is very, very critical. Any thoughts on this, Guillaume?
Yeah, thanks for asking. I think it's one of the hardest and maybe most frustrating challenges that we all face. How we work with those business people that are not dedicated to that topic and not always understand it well. I guess most of the time, those business people don't know how far AI can or should help them, and they can be either sometimes too cautious and scared of leveraging AI, and also misunderstand the inherent risks that it means and the biases that it means to leverage AI, to use AI. And on the other hand, data scientists often don't feel legitimate asking in detail how the business decisions are taken. So how will the output of that project be used? What can actually be done by the people on the field to leverage those insights? And that's a shame, because it's in that very conversation that we make or break the project impacts, by understanding very well this articulation between output and business decision. So let me take an example. Maybe 5 years ago, let's say, one of the big use cases that was on everybody's lips was churn prediction, right? Very standard one. And it was also standard. So pretty much every company was working on one or had worked on one. We at Dataiku, I think, demoed that over anything else at the time, because it resonated with everyone very well. And some of the learning that we collectively found is that, well, customers that predicted to churn actually churned. and that the resource that we all invested into marketing campaigns to try and get them back with us had little to no sometimes had little to no benefit. I'm not saying that all churns projects were a failure, but what we've discovered is that there are multiple issues behind this idea of churn. The root cause can be many things, right? It can be issues with the customer quality of service. It can also be a push from a competitor on your specific region, and not everything can be solved by a marketing campaign. In addition to that, not everybody react well to a marketing campaign. Some of them click the spam button before they can even process the title of the email. So what we were all working on predicting churn. Actually, what we were all looking for was predicting likelihood to be positively influenced by a marketing campaign. And that's a much harder AI nut to crack, although it's the right one to tackle. So working with the business to define outputs can reveal multiple sub-issues that need to be tackled as part of the use case. Would you model those different sub-issues and tackle them effectively, Dhiman?
Yeah, I mean, like you said, I mean, so I wouldn't call this a misconception, but maybe an oversight in most of the projects. Like, let's say, for example, you have a business need, like you need to prevent churn to happen. So obviously there are multiple steps to it. First step would be to identify who are the ones that are going to be churned, and then take an actionable step on that, right? So essentially one problem, one project, or one project is equal to one use case is a very can happen. It's not that it's not possible, but it's very unlikely, because in my experience, most decision-making process are very layered, and there is a decisioning journey, what I would call, and every step of the way you essentially have more and more, let's say, the granularity increases, the effectiveness of the model fluctuates. So depending on which layer of the decisioning journey you are in, you essentially need to take a call. To be honest, there are so essentially structuring the business problem that the team comes up with has to be structured in a project, saying that okay, it's not only one use case, it has multiple layers to it, and for each of those layers you essentially need to build not one model but multiple models to serve different questions for that decision to happen, right? So just that tree structure of how the decisioning is taking place. And there are actually mature clients out there who are actually running hundreds and if not 1,000 models. But I don't mean to say like all problems or use cases would be similar or of that high volume nature, but just to ensure organizations, especially business or project managers, realize the notion of this is very possible is important. Everybody needs to realize that okay, this is how it works. End of the day, understanding the objectives of a project from a business perspective is critical, and solving it in the right way is also essential. So identify what, why before getting into the how part. What I would say, what I would like to summarize, and once you have that kind of clarity of understanding of that, how important structuring of an objective for an AI project could be, the point comes is how do you manage expectations with the stakeholders, right? So I'd like to pass on this question to you, maybe. What do you think?
Yeah, well, to make it short, don't invite them for coffee, invite them to work. Sadly, somehow for all of us, it's better to have a less accurate model, but one that is more leveraged by the business. And I think we all face that question at some point. Do we go black box or do we go low tech, so to speak, in the model that we allow ourselves to use in our projects? So business ownership is essential, right? And I think their direct contribution to the project is the single best way to make them feel that it's also their baby, even though they're not carried in their tummy and you're doing most of the heavy lifting. So this contribution can take many forms. So as we've discussed earlier, sharing the business context, decision-making process, what's the next action that will be take, allows you to define a sharp project output. You can also try to define what's good enough, what's better, what's the best. output and decision-making process is impact on the decision-making process to be more agile in the way that you actually deliver the project and be more resilient, I would say. When you're working on a versatile workbench, like Dataiku, for example, it provides tools for both coders and clickers, so less technical people, to get involved in a project. And that's an opportunity for you to make sure that they contribute to some, maybe the early steps of the project, data discovery, a bit of data cleansing. But that will make it much easier for you afterwards to explain to them how the project developed from that to the full prediction, model training, and heavy and more technical data processing part. So it's handy to not be doing those cumbersome tasks, but it's really about involving them, right? Giving them a part to play.
Yeah.
Ahead of the model training, you can ask them to define the acceptance criteria to check for performances of the model, but also biases. It's their job to liaise with AI governance or risk teams if you have ones in your organizations. And they should definitely work on a change management procedure or a strategy to ensure the adoption of the project output. And you're very legitimate to ask for that, or at least visibility on that to understand how it's going to be used after that. But enough with the business side of the moon. People are slowly realizing also how important engineering is for AI project. What's your take on that?
Well, in AI, especially engineering comes across mostly like whenever you bring up the engineering keyword, people think that we are talking about data engineering, but to be very honest, there's a lot more to it. And then I just made a LinkedIn post a couple of days before, and reminds me, it actually generated from the same thing, that the difference between the data science, the science part of it, and the real world is actually engineering, right? And when I mean engineering is, like I said, it's not only the data engineering part, it's making sure that your consumption parameters of the output that's getting generated from the AI models is actually integrated and operationalized with the business processes. And these activities require solid, like proper computer engineering skills. I'm talking about front-end integrations, business application integrations, large-scale deployments, or let's say monitoring whether your data distribution has been changed, or whether there is a change in the concepts, and all those things. So these take significant time and effort to make sure your project implementation is not a one-off kind of an implementation. So you have the necessary feedback information looped into your implementation as well, so that you can keep on generating further insights, plus make sure that it's resistant to any future change, or at least raises flags when that happens, right? So these are very important uh, uh, activities. Like engineering is actually applicable for taking any technological advancement to scale, and that's where you reach the full potential of any kind of technology, for that matter. And data science is not different. So but the point is, with engineering, the most challenging aspect would be then to deep dive into the technical gaps, right? Because the current world expectations of data scientists, or let's say the lead data scientist, or let's say the person who's managing the overall implementations in a particular org, they still assume that it's only the data side of the world that they need to worry about, maybe a little bit of business, but the engineering integration side, it's quite massive. So there are serious gaps in there, and that is where I believe platform can play a major role. And since you guys, Dataiku is quite a nice full-fledged platform out there in the market, how do you see that area? How do you enable more and more users on that aspect?
Yeah, it's a good question. Even if you have great engineers, you want them to be as efficient as possible in order to cover more projects with the same workforce. That means that you need to iron out a path to production to make sure you have as few technological gaps as possible. And you want typically to avoid refactoring or any activity that would frequently impose a step back in the project lifecycle, redoing stuff that has already been done for technical reasons. Ideally, you want to always be building on top of what's already been done in the previous steps, and to move engineering tasks even in the development phase when possible, to make sure that deployment is just a matter of clicking buttons, so to speak, from your CI/CD pipelines, which is, by the way, the philosophy that Dataiku has embraced when designing its product. Right? It's an end-to-end platform where most of we hope that most engineering work can be worked on and thought at the development phase, and everything else should be pre-wired so that deployment, there's no surprise, right, when it comes to deployment. There's multiple areas or features area that are involved with that. One is that Dataiku provides an abstraction layer from a technological standpoint. It's able to translate the logic described within the product into different languages, which means that if you have some technological gaps, between development and production environments, Dataiku will make it easier for you to bridge those gaps without having to redo things, and that creates a lot of leeway. Second one is that there's a lot of built-in tools to improve performances early on, again on the design notes at the development stage, leveraging partitions, leveraging Spark pipelines, translating automatically code into Spark code for it to be executed on clusters as well. Orchestration is also something that we encourage users to do right after model approval, and start thinking about what happens if some of my inputs are missing, or how do I monitor the performances of my model. And it can go as far as to implementing automatic champion challenger approaches with automatic deployment of the new champion after retraining and comparison of the model. So it can go quite far in an automated fashion. And last, you can check on all projects where those features are leveraged at the development stage. So you're able to dispatch. So you would be kind of building health scores for the project before they move to the deployment phase. That lets you assess where are my engineers most needed, right? Maybe some projects are very close to the maximum score, and you can expect little involvement from your team, maybe from the engineering team, just reviewing that everything is fine. And on some other, you can anticipate a lot more workload, and so it's easier to manage your team this way. Mm-hmm. So, Dhiman, once you've designed that path to production and made it as favorable as possible, how do you check that things are actually working, or rather, for predictive projects, will actually work?
Yeah. So for any project management, I mean, UAT plays a major role, and this sounds almost in line with that area. But what I would like to suggest every organization out there is UAT for any AI or machine learning based projects are not exactly so what traditional UAT processes look like. It's not a one apple to apple comparison scenario. We are talking about inferencing something that has not happened yet, so you have to wait for that to happen to validate whether it has worked properly. So that essentially does not, technically by the definition of UAT, does not hold. UAT generally is done on production data, but if you want to do that in production for AI, you need to have it deployed. So you see the paradox that's going on here. But essentially, there is still a few areas of UAT in an AI project that I would say, like, let's say, for example, the integration aspect, or let's say the delivery SLA of your end-to-end servicing, that prediction or that inference that needs to happen, right? Plus a long executed, let's say, testing of data drift, concept drift, whether they are being handled by the solution well or not. These are areas that could be important for any business to look at, rather than evaluating whether the model is going to do well or not, because there is always going to be uncertainties. And we have talked about this in the previous Fireside, that it's a highly iterative process. It's a very experimental, let's say, notional implementation idea for AI. So you have to be flexible around this rather than having a fixed, let's say, threshold kind of a pattern, like let's have this percentage of accuracy, because accuracy in real world um, doesn't have that much effectiveness, I would say, because after accuracy there are a lot of things that comes in, like you mentioned, likelihood and so on and so forth. So one particular model can be very, very highly accurate, but the remaining of them can entirely jeopardize or topple down your business objective altogether. So attributing a single model or evaluating a single model for the success of a particular objective is again not right. So you have to take these things with a pinch of salt, I would suggest. Yeah. So I mean, to bring things to a close, I mean, this has been a really, really interesting conversation, and I think we can go on for a while. But just to close, from my end, one question would be, um, that appetite for organizations regarding AI projects, and how should organizations manage that? Like whether a run fast, break things, fix later, or do a slow burn. What should be the approach?
Yeah, well, so we definitely see a lot of contradiction or same tension, I guess, with an organization on that topic. They're a bit torn on the matter. Not many companies have management that are very versed in the technicalities of AI. For a lot of them, it's still very theoretical or black box, and they cannot make an opinion for themselves whether or not a given project is an opportunity or a risk, right? And this is further aggravated by the fact that few companies outside of very regulated sectors have governance and risk policies for AI. And without the reassurance of those processes in place to make sure that the right questions are answered by the right people, AI can feel a bit like a Pandora box. If that's your case, and I guess in a lot of companies, it will be the case, that means that it's down on our shoulders, CDO, data science, head of data science, etc., to make sure we do this extra mile to reassure management on the consequence and the impact of the project. And so there's a lot of different things that can be done on the topic, and it's a bit frustrating for us, I think, because it feels outside of our scope. I will mention 5, I guess, that we should really try and systematically do, even if there's no system around that to force us to do so. One is establishing the baseline that you're looking to improve. Okay, we want to build a predictive model, but how are people currently taking decisions, and with what level of success, and how much do we want to improve that? What are the potential impacts of misprediction and misclassification, particularly from an ethical standpoint? So not just doing the cost-benefit analysis and performance analysis, but also for those that will be mispredicted, what's the impact for that? What's the risk of biases, etc. You definitely have to define a monitoring and alerting process or procedures, and there's multiple layers to monitor infrastructure. Is the project running? Is the model still relevant? So you have to nail that down and write it down somewhere. In case of, then it can be difficult to identify someone from the business side to approve the model. It's very comfortable for us to do so. And on the other hand, if we don't, it will be very easy for the business to blame everything on us. So it's a complicated conversation. It's a slow one, I would say, but an important one. And the last one is, okay, if my model is drifting, I need to retrain. What happens if I cannot automatically retrain and redeploy? If I need to review and redo a project, so to speak, to improve. In the meantime, how do we do, right?
Yeah.
Dhiman, how much more time do we have? Do we have time for a last question? What do you think?
Yeah, I think we can have another question.
Yeah, I was wondering one thing. So as I said, we typically hope for the best but plan for the worst, and that's where investing into components that will make contribution to mass producing AI becomes essential, so we don't get exhausted or too tired of doing those things manually each time. According to you, what is essential to scale AI, basically?
Well, to be honest, I mean, the operationalization and scaling the AI is exactly the topic for our next fireside chat. But just to give a very uh, brief idea on top of it, rather than scaling, I would not only put scaling as the main objective, but scaling sustainably is the main challenge. Anybody can put more resources, more data scientists into the team and ask them to build as much as possible. But making sure that we are doing that sustainably is the real, let's say, game changer or value for any organization. So, couple of points: modular vision, having a proper standardized framework, not from a platform standpoint or not from a, let's say, the vendor that you're working with, but from an internal organization standpoint itself. You should have a governance framework of any AI project that gets implemented should follow this steps, right? And what should be the framework around it? What are the minimum modular structures for every AI project that goes in? Standard framework that contains topics like, let's say, feature stores, microservice based deployment, model registry, which can be audited, which can be governed, which can be evaluated at any point of time. A little bit of open would be good. So cross team collaboration is also essential if it's possible. So these are aspects should be considered for any kind of scaling topic, and especially when you're talking about doing that, sustainably. So that's how I'd like to take that question. But I think uh, let's close for the today, um, and let's see if we have what questions. But before that, um, just to uh, put some thoughts in our attendees' mind, uh, please reach out if you have any questions. Obviously, uh, to Dataiku as well as ClearPeaks, we are providing 360-degree AI assessment workshops, use case identification workshops, and also help you do a maturity assessment. If any of these things look interesting to you, just reach out. There will be the contact information in the next one. And obviously, like I said, the operationalizing and the scaling of end-to-end AI, like and everything integrated and deployed for your AI initiatives, is our next topic for the next fireside chat. Uh, exactly another month from now. So stay tuned. Yeah. With that, let's see if we have any questions. I can see one in the Q&A. Do you see a lot of agile ways of work for AI projects? Are they compatible because of the iteration and experimentation involved in BI building AI models? Well, Guillaume, would you like to take this?
I can give a first understanding, and then I'm happy to hear your thoughts on that. I would say that I don't see a lot of it currently. I think it's only possible. It's ambitious, basically. It's only possible if you've decided to put your product owner, someone from the business, and involve him at the core of the project. So that means a lot of investment, so to speak, in the relationship, in upskilling that person, in carving a part for him to play in the project. And it's not always something that people think is reasonable to do, right? So I've seen it a couple of times. It's not majority of times right now. I think it will improve as business mature.
My take on this is, for me, project plans should be very precise. Okay, and with agile, it gets more complicated because there are so many iterations, and because AI and machine learning implementations are sometimes very experimental and can become a little exploratory and investigative in nature, you cannot precisely sometimes allocate a particular, let's say, sprint timeline, right? So that makes it very difficult to preempt and plan your project. So although, uh, like you said, few clients definitely have tried it. For some use cases it works, some it doesn't, like especially with unsupervised kind of um, implementations. It's a pure no, I would suggest. But yeah, if you need more iterations, you need to definitely keep buffer timelines in your project plan. One thing that we all hate is backlogs in our agile plan, right? So yeah, that's my thought. I think that's any other questions from anyone? Okay. In that case, thank you everyone for joining. Really lovely to have you as well, Guillaume. Really interesting conversation. For anything in the audience to get back to us, please note down the contact information. If you have further questions, reach out to us as well. We'll be very happy to answer those as well. Okay. So thank you so much, and
Thank you, Dhiman.
yeah, wish you all have a great day. Take care. Stay healthy.